The woman sits across from me at a table draped in white linen, candlelight dancing between us. Behind her, Charlotte's skyline glitters through floor-to-ceiling windows. She reaches into her designer handbag, the one I'd watched her charge to my credit card 6 months earlier, and slides a folder across the table. It's thick, expensive cardstock. My name is on it in gold-embossed letters. "Just sign it, Mom," my son says. His voice is flat. He doesn't meet my eyes. But before I tell you what happened that night, I need you to understand who I am and how we got here. My name is Marlene. I'm 58 years old. I've been a widow for 11 years. My husband, Robert, left me this house. 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a garden where I grow tomatoes every summer. He left it to me free and clear. No mortgage, no liens, just mine. We bought it together in 1994 for $160,000. Today it's worth just under $380,000. That house is the only thing I have left of Robert besides my memories and a wedding ring I never take off. I also have retirement savings, nearly $220,000. I've been careful. I've been disciplined. Every penny I earned as a surgical scheduler at Atrium Health for 32 years went into accounts I could live on someday. I wasn't rich, I was secure. And in 2024, when you're a widow in her late 50s, security feels like wealth. My son Cody was born when I was 29. He's my only child. When Robert got sick in 2013, Cody was 24, working in construction, still figuring out his life. He moved back home to help me care for his father. He held Robert's hand when he died. We grieved together. And even after Robert was gone, even after Cody moved out and built his own life, we stayed close. He'd come over for Sunday dinners. He'd help me with projects around the house. He was a good son. Then he met Sasha. It was 3 years ago, in the spring of 2021. Cody came to one of my dinners with a girlfriend. She was striking, long dark hair, high cheekbones, the kind of woman who commands a room. She wore a red dress that looked like it cost more than my monthly grocery budget. When she smiled, it was bright and quick, like a camera flash. "Mom, this is Sasha," Cody said, and I could hear the pride in his voice. I welcomed her. I made a roast. I asked her questions and listened to her answers. She told me about her family. Her parents owned a restaurant supply business in Mooresville. She said she'd gone to Chapel Hill for business school, but didn't finish her degree. She was working in sales, though she was vague about the details. I didn't think much of it at the time. By summer, she'd moved into Cody's apartment. By fall, they were talking about engagement. By the following February, he brought her a 2-carat diamond ring he'd financed. I wondered how he'd afforded it on his carpenter's salary, but I didn't ask. That wasn't my business. They got married last June, a big wedding at a resort in Asheville. Her family paid for most of it, which I appreciated because my finances couldn't have covered the whole thing. Cody looked happy. Sasha looked beautiful. I sat in the front row and cried like mothers do. But even at the wedding, I started to notice things. Sasha was cool to me that day. When her mother came over to me and hugged me and said, "I'm so glad Cody's marrying into our family," Sasha's jaw tightened. Later, during the reception, when Cody wanted to dance with me for the mother-son dance, Sasha pulled him aside first, and I watched them argue. Quietly, but it was an argument about the timing. The first few months of their marriage were fine. Cody and I still talked on the phone. We still got together occasionally, but the frequency dropped. The dinners at my house became less frequent. When he did come over, he'd often mention that Sasha didn't want to stay long, or that Sasha had made other plans, or that Sasha was tired. By the end of 2022, I was seeing him maybe twice a month. By early 2023, once a month. By the summer of 2023, I was lucky if I got a phone call every 2 weeks. I didn't blame Cody. I understood that marriage comes first. But I noticed that when Sasha would call him, he'd always excuse himself. He'd take the phone into another room. His voice would change. It would become eager, almost nervous, like he was trying to satisfy someone who was hard to please. And I started noticing other things too. One Sunday in September of 2023, Cody came to dinner alone. It was the first time in months he'd come without Sasha. He looked thinner. His eyes had that tired, haunted quality I recognized from when his father was sick. We sat at my kitchen table, and I made his favorite, pot roast with carrots and potatoes, and he barely touched it. "Cody, are you okay?" I asked. "I'm fine, Mom, just tired." "Is Sasha okay?" He hesitated too long. "Yeah, she's fine. We're both just dealing with some things." "What kind of things?" He stood up and rinsed his plate, his back to me. "Nothing serious. You don't need to worry." But I did worry. Over the next few months, things got stranger. Cody would mention casually that they were looking at houses. When I asked him what kind of budget they had, he said Sasha was helping them secure some funding. He never specified from where. Another time, he mentioned that Sasha's family had had some business challenges and that Sasha was stressed about money, but then he'd quickly change the subject. I'm not a stupid woman. I could see that something financial was wrong, but I didn't press him. That wasn't my place. What I did notice, though, was how Sasha treated me when I saw her. It was subtle, but it was there, a slight coldness. When I'd ask Cody a question, she'd interrupt him with something about herself. When I'd offer to help them with something, a dinner, a small loan, she'd find a way to decline that made it clear my offer wasn't wanted. One time, in early 2024, I was at their apartment. I brought a casserole and mentioned that maybe we could all go to dinner sometime, just the three of us, to celebrate Cody's birthday. Sasha smiled that flash smile and said, "Oh, Marlene, we'd love to, but honestly, you and Cody just have so little in common these days. I'd feel bad leaving you out of the conversation. And Cody and I have so much going on. We're really in our own little world right now." The way she said it, our own little world, with her hand on Cody's arm, watching his face to see if he'd agree. And he did agree. He nodded and said maybe later in the year. It never happened. By the spring of 2024, I'd been to their apartment twice in 6 months. They hadn't been to my house in almost a year. On my birthday in March, Cody called me, but Sasha was in the background, and the conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes. He promised to stop by with a cake, but he never did. I learned to accept it. I told myself that this was how things went when your child got married to someone who didn't like you. I was 58 years old. I was old enough to know that you can't force relationships, so I stopped trying so hard. I stopped making the casseroles. I stopped suggesting dinners. I stopped calling as much. It hurt, but I adjusted. My neighbor Doris knew something was wrong. Doris is 72, retired from being a notary public, and she's one of those people who notices everything. We'd sit on our porches in the evenings and talk, and I might mention casually that I hadn't seen much of Cody lately. She'd always tell me, "Marlene, that wife of his is no good. I'm telling you, that girl has got wheels turning." "You don't even know her, Doris," I'd say. "I know the type," she'd say back. But then, in May of 2024, something happened that changed everything. It was a Tuesday evening. I was inside, watching Jeopardy, and I heard raised voices outside. I recognized Cody's truck in Doris's driveway. He must have been driving past, visiting his old friend. I heard a woman's voice, high, sharp, angry. It was Sasha. She must have been on the phone in the truck. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I simply didn't close the door between my screened porch and the interior of my house, and the voices carried. "I don't care what you told her," Sasha was saying. "Your mother has money. She has a paid-off house. She has retirement savings that could set us up for life. And she's not getting any younger, Cody. We need to stop being nice and start being smart." My heart stopped. "I know, but," Cody started. "No buts. We're drowning, Cody. My credit is destroyed. Your paycheck isn't enough. We're living in that apartment like we're still 25 years old, and I can't do it anymore. Your mother can give us what we need. All she cares about is that house anyway. She could sign it over to us, move into something smaller, and we'd all be better off. She'd have less to maintain, we'd have equity, and the taxes would be better for everyone. I don't know if I can ask her to do that." "You're not asking. I am. And I'm going to make it easy for her. I'm going to make her feel like it's her idea, like it's what she wants, and you're going to support me on it. Do you understand? When the time comes, you're going to sit there and agree with me, and your mother is going to do what we tell her to do." The phone call ended. I heard Cody's truck door open and close. I heard him drive away. I sat very still in my living room, the television playing quietly in front of me, and I felt something shift inside my chest. It wasn't just anger, though there was plenty of that. It was a kind of cold clarity. This woman, my son's wife, had planned to manipulate me, to steal from me, and my son, my dear son, was going to help her. When Cody was born, I held him in the hospital, and I promised Robert that I would protect our son, that I would raise him to be good and honest and kind. I'd kept that promise. I'd done everything I could to make him a good man. And somewhere along the way, he'd married someone who was teaching him how to become a thief. I turned off the television and went to bed. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I called Doris and asked her to come over. When she did, I told her what I'd heard. She sat at my kitchen table and shook her head like she'd known it all along. "You need to protect yourself, Marlene," she said. "That woman is not going to stop until she gets what she wants." "What am I supposed to do?" I asked. "My son is her husband. I can't just cut him off." "No," Doris said, "but you can be smart. You can talk to a lawyer, you can figure out what she's planning, and you can shut it down before it happens." I knew she was right. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I searched online for an estate attorney in Charlotte. I called 3 different law firms and made consultations. The third one was the best. A woman named Dale Riverside, mid-50s, sharp as a tack, with an office downtown that smelled like leather books and coffee. I sat across from her in a leather chair and I told her everything. About Sasha. About the phone call I'd overheard. About my house, my savings, my fears. Dale listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said, "Tell me about the documents you might be asked to sign." I realized then that Dale understood exactly what Sasha had planned. She knew that the end game was a durable power of attorney, which would give Sasha and Cody legal control over all my finances, and a property deed transfer that would put the house in their names. "Here's what you need to do," Dale said. "First, you need to secure your finances. I'll help you set up a trust that protects your assets from being transferred without your direct knowledge. Second, you need to document everything. If you can gather evidence of fraud, identity theft, anything illegal, we'll have leverage. And third, You need to be prepared for a conversation with Cody." "I can't imagine that conversation," I said. "You may not have to," Dale replied. "If we catch her in the act, the conversation might happen in a different way." I left Dale's office feeling both terrified and strangely empowered. Over the next week, Dale helped me investigate. We pulled my credit reports, and there it was, a credit card in my name that I'd never applied for. Sasha had opened it, and she'd used it to rack up nearly $8,000 in purchases. Clothing, restaurants, a spa weekend in Boone, designer sunglasses, purses. The fraud was clear. I also learned that Sasha's family business had collapsed 2 years ago, that her parents had had to file for bankruptcy, that Sasha had tried to hide this from Cody, but he'd found out 6 months into their marriage, that she'd told him everything would be fine if they could just secure some assets while her parents recovered. And I learned something else, something that made my blood run cold. Sasha had another phone. She'd been having an affair with a man named Marcus, who worked in real estate. She'd been seeing him for nearly a year. She'd paid for hotel rooms with the fraudulent credit card. She'd been cheating on my son while planning to steal from me. When Dale showed me the documentation, the hotel receipts, the photos of Sasha and Marcus together, taken by a private investigator Dale had hired, the phone records, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Angry at Sasha, heartbroken for Cody, protective of myself. "What do you want to do?" Dale asked me. I thought about it for a long moment. "I want to give my son a chance to choose the right thing," I said, "before everything falls apart." Then, in early June, I got the call. "Hi, Mom," Cody said, and he sounded nervous. Sasha and I were thinking, would you want to go to dinner with us? Like, soon? This coming Friday? There's this restaurant she's been wanting to try called Vesper. It's really fancy. Our treat." My hands went cold. "Of course," I said, my voice steady. "I'd love that." And that's when I knew the setup had begun. The days between that phone call and Friday felt like they stretched into weeks. I moved through them mechanically. I'd wake up, I'd go to work. I was doing part-time medical billing at that point, just enough to stay busy. And I'd come home and sit in my kitchen thinking about my son. Cody had sounded nervous on that phone call. Nervous in a way that told me he wasn't entirely comfortable with what he and Sasha were about to do. Maybe that was wishful thinking on my part. Maybe I was trying to see something in him that wasn't there. But I held on to it anyway. That Wednesday, 2 days before the dinner, I called Dale. "Are you ready?" she asked. "I'm not sure I'll ever be ready," I said, "but I'm prepared." "Good. I've got everything here. The cease and desist letter, the credit report with the fraudulent card highlighted, the photos, the private investigator's affidavit. Everything is notarized. I've also written out a summary document that outlines exactly what Sasha did. The fraud, the affair, the secret debts, all of it." "And the letter?" I asked. "The letter is ready. You can handwrite it if you want to, or I can print out what you dictated." I'd spent an evening with Dale going over what I wanted to say to Cody. She'd transcribed it, but I wanted him to see my handwriting. I wanted him to know that every word came directly from my heart. "I'll handwrite it," I said. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a pen and nice stationery, and I wrote to my son. I told him that I loved him, that I knew he was struggling, that I knew Sasha had convinced him that this was the right thing to do, that I understood desperation could make people make bad choices. But then I told him the truth. I told him about the credit card opened in my name, about the affair, about the fraud. And most importantly, I told him that he had a choice. That even if he'd already made plans with Sasha, even if he'd already agreed to this dinner, even if he was planning to ask me to sign documents, he could still choose differently. He could choose me. He could choose honesty. He could choose family. I told him that I would always be his mother, and that mothers forgive their children, but they also tell them the truth. When I finished writing the letter, I sealed it in an envelope and I addressed it to him in my handwriting. Then I called Dale and told her I was ready. "What are you going to do?" Dale asked. "At the dinner." "I'm going to let Sasha think she's winning," I said, "until I show her she's not." Friday arrived. I spent the day preparing myself mentally. I did my hair and makeup carefully. I put on a dress I'd bought years ago for a special occasion. Navy blue, elegant, the kind of dress that makes you feel like you know exactly who you are. I looked at myself in the mirror, and I saw my mother's eyes looking back at me. Strong, sad, determined. At 6 o'clock, Cody's truck pulled into my driveway. I grabbed my purse, the one I'd used every day for the past 5 years, soft brown leather, worn in exactly the right way. It felt heavier than usual. That was the folder from Dale, tucked carefully inside, along with the letter I'd written to Cody. Cody was alone in the truck. Sasha had driven separately. He was quiet when I got in, and he didn't look at me directly. I could smell his cologne and his nervousness, and it broke my heart. "You look nice, Mom," he said as he drove. "Thank you, sweetheart. So do you." We drove toward downtown Charlotte without talking much. He turned on the radio and we listened to some soft music, and I watched the city lights beginning to come on as the sun set. We crossed the bridge over the Catawba River, and I thought about how many times Robert and I had crossed this same bridge, how many dinners we'd gone to, how many moments of ordinary life we'd shared. Vesper was on Tryon Street in a building that looked like it had been renovated 1,000 times, but still kept some of its original architecture. It was the kind of restaurant where the host knew your name before you even said it, where the chairs were more comfortable than the furniture in most people's living rooms, where a small plate of something delicious appeared in front of you before you'd even open the menu. Sasha was waiting for us at the table. She stood when we arrived, and she hugged Cody in a way that was performative, for anyone watching, not for any genuine affection. She looked stunning. She was wearing a black dress that probably cost more than my car's monthly depreciation, and diamonds at her throat and wrists. She'd gotten her hair done. She looked like a woman about to make a major acquisition. When she looked at me, she smiled. It was her flash smile, the one like a camera flash, bright, calculated, designed to make me feel welcome, even though we both knew she'd never wanted me in any room she occupied. "Marlene," she said, kissing my cheek in a way that felt like a threat. "I'm so glad you could make it. We've been wanting to do this for so long." We sat down. A server appeared almost immediately with water and wine recommendations. We ordered. The conversation moved along like all dinner conversations do. We talked about the restaurant, about how beautiful Charlotte looked from this height, about how good the bread was. Sasha did most of the talking. She had this way of filling silences, of controlling the narrative, of making sure that Cody and I never got a moment of real connection. I watched her. I studied her, and I noticed something I'd never quite seen before. She was afraid. Underneath all that confidence and polish, she was terrified. Her hand shook slightly when she reached for her wine glass. She laughed a little too loudly at her own jokes. She kept touching Cody, his arm, his hand, his shoulder, like she was trying to tether him to her, like she could feel him slipping away. Our food arrived. We ate. And then, as the dessert course was being cleared, Sasha reached into her designer handbag. This was the moment. She withdrew a folder. It was thick, expensive cardstock. My name was embossed on it in gold lettering. She placed it carefully on the table in front of Cody, and then she slid it across the white linen toward me. "We're so glad you agreed to this dinner, Marlene," she said, and her voice had changed. It wasn't conversational anymore. It was businesslike. Cool. "Cody and I have been talking a lot about our future, and we thought you might want to be part of that, to help us the way parents do." I didn't touch the folder. I just looked at it. "Inside that folder," she continued, "you'll find a durable power of attorney. It's very simple. It just means that Cody and I can handle your financial affairs if anything ever happens to you. It's really quite standard for people your age. And there's also a quitclaim deed for the house. We thought you might want to transfer it to us now, while you can enjoy seeing us have it. For tax purposes, of course. It's much more efficient this way." Cody still said nothing. He stared at his plate like it held the secrets of the universe. I looked at Sasha. I really looked at her, and I smiled. "Of course," I said. My voice was calm, warm, almost kind. "But first, let's order dessert." Sasha blinked. It was just a small thing, but I saw it, that moment of confusion. She'd planned this entire conversation, this entire evening, and I'd just upended it by not reacting the way she'd expected. "I'm sorry," she said. "Dessert," I repeated. "I noticed they have an amazing chocolate soufflé. I've heard people rave about it. Let's order that, and while we're waiting for it, I have something I want to discuss with you both." I reached down and opened my purse. I pulled out the folder from Dale's office. It was nearly as thick as the one Sasha had presented, and it was also expensive cardstock. But instead of my name, it was labeled "Confidential Documentation." I placed it carefully on the table. "Before I sign anything," I said, still using that same warm, measured tone, "I think we should talk about this." Sasha's face went white. "What is that?" she asked. I opened the folder. I pulled out the cease and desist letter from Dale Riverside, attorney at law. I pushed it across the table so Sasha could read the header. Then I pulled out the credit report, the one that showed the fraudulent credit card opened in my name, the purchases, the $8,000 balance. "Do you see this?" I asked Sasha, pointing to the account number. "This is an account I never opened. This is identity fraud. This is a crime, Sasha." Sasha's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She looked at Cody. "I don't know what she's talking about," she said. "Don't lie to me," I said quietly. "Not anymore. I know you opened this card. I have documentation. I have records. I have an attorney." Then I pulled out the private investigator's photos, the ones of Sasha and Marcus at the hotel on Vine Street, the ones of them holding hands, the ones of them kissing in the parking lot. "And I know about him," I said. "Marcus, the man you've been sleeping with while married to my son." The restaurant, which had been humming with the quiet murmur of other diners and servers and soft music, suddenly felt silent. I don't know if everyone around us actually stopped talking, or if it just felt that way. I only knew that everything had shifted. The air felt thinner. The light felt brighter. Sasha's face crumbled. Not the way you'd expect from someone who was caught in a lie. Not indignant or defensive, just genuinely broken, like something inside her was giving way. "Marlene, she started. "I don't want to hear it," I said. I was sad, I was heartbroken, but I wasn't angry. "I want to hear from my son." I looked at Cody. His face was ashen. He was staring at the photos like they were evidence of his own failure, which, in a way, they were. I reached into my purse one more time. I pulled out the letter I'd written, the one in my handwriting, the one that said everything I needed him to know. I handed it to him across the table. "I wrote this for you," I said. "I want you to read it, privately, not here, later, when you're alone, and I want you to think about what you choose next." Cody took the letter with trembling hands. I could see tears starting to form in his eyes. "Mom," he said, and his voice broke on that single word. "Mom, I know," I said gently. "I know you were scared. I know you were desperate. I know you thought you were helping someone you love, but you have to understand what you were about to do. You were about to sign documents that would have given her complete control over everything I've spent my life building, everything your father and I built together." Cody's shoulders started to shake. He was crying silently, tears running down his face while he stared at the envelope in his hands. Sasha, meanwhile, had stood up. "This is insane," she said, her voice high and shaky. "I'm leaving." "You do that," I said, "but understand that I have copies of all of this, copies that have already been delivered to a safe place, and I have an attorney who is prepared to press charges for identity fraud. What happens next is up to you and the decisions you make." Sasha looked at Cody like she was expecting him to defend her, to stand up for her, to choose her the way he'd been choosing her for 3 years. But Cody just sat there, crying, holding the letter his mother had written him. Sasha grabbed her purse. She didn't say another word. She just walked away from the table, her heels clicking on the marble floor, the sound of them fading as she disappeared into the lobby of the restaurant. I watched her go, and then I looked back at my son. "I'm going to go to the ladies' room for a few minutes," I said quietly. "I want you to have some privacy to read that letter. And I want you to know that I love you, Cody. I always have, and I always will. But sometimes love means telling people the truth, even when it's hard." I stood up. I put my hand on his shoulder for just a moment. And then I walked away, leaving him alone at the table with the letter that would change everything. I stood in the bathroom of Vesper for longer than I needed to. I didn't actually have to use the facilities. I just needed to be alone for a moment, away from the table, away from my son's tears, away from the weight of everything that had just happened. I looked at myself in the mirror. My makeup was still perfect. My hair was still in place. I looked composed, elegant, in control. But my hands were shaking. I gripped the edge of the sink and I let myself feel it. All of it. The anger at Sasha. The heartbreak over Cody. The fear about what came next. The sadness that things had to be this way. I let it wash over me like a wave, and then I let it pass. When I came back to the table 15 minutes later, Cody was still there. The letter was in his lap. His face was blotchy from crying, but he'd composed himself. The documents Sasha had brought were still on the table, untouched. The folder from Dale's office was still spread out, open, undeniable. "I read it," he said quietly. "Okay," I said, sitting back down. I read every word. The server approached, uncertain. I waved him away gently. This was not a moment for dessert or coffee or the normal rituals of fine dining. "I don't know what to say," Cody continued. "I don't know how to apologize for what I was about to do, for letting her—" "I know you were scared," I said. "I know you thought you were helping her. I know she told you this was normal, that it was for tax purposes, that it was what families did." "She said you'd want to help us," he said, and there was a note of desperate justification in his voice. "She said that's what mothers do. They help their kids." "Mothers do help their kids," I said. but they don't help them become criminals, and they don't let themselves be victimized in the process. Cody flinched at the word criminals, but I let it stand. He needed to understand the gravity of what almost happened. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we figure it out," I said. "Together. The first thing is that you need to understand exactly what Sasha has done. Not what she's told you, but what she's actually done. There's a credit card in my name with $8,000 of fraudulent charges. There's an affair. There's evidence of financial manipulation and deception going back years. My attorney is prepared to file fraud charges." "She's still my wife," he said, and there was something almost mechanical about the way he said it, like he was testing out a sentence he'd been told to say. "I know," I said, "and you're going to have to make some very difficult decisions about that. But I want you to understand, those decisions are yours to make. Not mine, not hers, yours. And I want you to make them from a place of clarity, not confusion." "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "I want you to go home tonight. I want you to read my letter again if you need to. I want you to think very carefully about who you want to be, about what kind of life you want to have. And I want you to understand that no matter what you decide, you're still my son. You're still welcome in my home. But there have to be consequences for both of you." Cody nodded slowly. He looked down at the letter in his lap, and I could see him reading it again with his eyes, the words somehow imprinted on the paper, on his memory, on his heart. "Can I ask you something?" he said after a moment. "Of course." How did you know all of this? How did you find out?" I thought about whether to tell him about Doris overhearing the phone call, whether to explain the investigation, the private investigator, the careful documentation. But I decided that those details could come later. What mattered now was the truth. "Because I love you," I said. "And when you love someone, you pay attention." I was paying attention. The drive home was quiet. Cody followed me in his truck. When we pulled into my driveway, he got out and walked over to my car. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in one evening. "I don't know where I'm going to go tonight," he said. "You can stay here if you want to," I said. "In your old room. It's still set up. It's still yours if you need it." "I can't. I don't think I can go back to that apartment. I don't think I can see her right now." "Then stay," I said. "We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." That night, Cody slept in his childhood bedroom. I heard him crying through the walls, and it broke my heart all over again. But I didn't go to him. He needed to sit with what he'd done, with what he'd almost done, with the person he'd let himself become. The next morning, I made breakfast. Real breakfast. Eggs, toast, fresh fruit, coffee. We sat at the kitchen table like we hadn't sat there in 3 years, and we talked. Cody told me everything. He told me about the restaurant business failure in Sasha's family, how it had blindsided them all. He told me about the mounting debt, the credit cards, the feeling of drowning in financial chaos. He told me that Sasha had convinced him that I owed it to them to help out, that it was my responsibility as his mother, that if I really loved him, I would be willing to sacrifice for his happiness. "She was so convincing," he said, and I could hear the shame in his voice. "She made it sound like you'd want to help, like it was what you were supposed to do." "I would have helped," I said gently. "If you'd asked me, if you'd been honest, if you'd told me the truth about what was happening, I would have helped. But not like this, not by signing away my house, not by giving up my security, not by being defrauded." "I know," he said. "I know that now." Over the following weeks, the legal process unfolded. Sasha was confronted with fraud charges. She hired an attorney, an expensive one, which meant her family's business failure was apparently not complete. The affair with Marcus came out. Cody filed for divorce. It wasn't clean. It wasn't simple. There were lawyers' fees and depositions and ugly conversations. But eventually, the fraudulent credit card was resolved. My credit was restored. The house remained in my name. My retirement savings were secure. And Sasha left town. She moved back to her parents' house in Mooresville. From what I heard through the grapevine, mostly through Doris, who seemed to have a direct line into everyone's business, she'd spent some time in therapy, had attempted some kind of rehabilitation, but she and Cody were definitively done. The divorce was finalized 9 months after that dinner at Vesper. But the more important story wasn't about Sasha's departure. It was about Cody's return. It took time. He didn't move back home permanently, but he did spend more and more time at the house. We'd have Sunday dinners again. He'd help me with projects in the yard. We'd sit on the porch in the evenings like we used to, and we'd talk about his life, his struggles, his attempts to figure out who he was outside of his marriage. He went to therapy. He worked through his own complicity in what had almost happened. He forgave himself slowly, and I forgave him too. Not because what he almost did was okay, but because I understood that he'd been manipulated by someone who was very good at manipulation, that he'd been desperate and scared and had made bad choices, and that those bad choices didn't erase the good person he was underneath. By the end of 2025, a year after that dinner, Cody came to me with a new girlfriend. Her name was Jennifer, and she was nothing like Sasha. She was quiet and kind, and she looked at Cody with genuine affection, not possession. I welcomed her to my home. I made her a roast. I asked her questions and I listened to her answers. "He's told me about everything," she said to me one evening when Cody had stepped outside. "About what happened, about his ex. I just want you to know that I understand why you had to do what you did." "Thank you for saying that," I said. "He's a good man," she continued, "but he needed to learn what being a good man actually meant." I nodded. She was right. In the spring of 2026, Cody asked me to help him pick out a ring. Not for Jennifer. They'd only been dating for a few months. But he wanted my opinion on what style he might like someday, when the time was right. We went to a jeweler in Charlotte, and I watched my son look at diamonds and gold bands with a quiet joy that I hadn't seen since he was a child. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't desperate. He was thoughtful. He was healing. When we left the jeweler's, we stopped for coffee at a little place near Uptown, and Cody said something I'll never forget. "I keep thinking about that letter," he said. "The one you gave me at Vesper." "Do you still have it?" I asked. "Of course I do. It's in a box at my apartment. I read it sometimes when I'm feeling lost again. And every time I read it, I remember something you said. That you love me. That you always will. Even when I was about to steal from you. Even when I'd let someone manipulate me into becoming someone I'm not. You still loved me." "Because that's what mothers do," I said. "We love our children. Even when we're furious with them, even when they disappoint us, even when they hurt us." "I'm sorry I hurt you," he said. "I know," I said, "and I forgive you." And I did, completely. The house is still mine. My retirement savings are still intact. I still live in the home I built with Robert, still tend to the garden where I grow tomatoes every summer. But what I have now that I didn't have before is clarity. Clarity about who my son is, who he can be, and who he chose to become when it mattered. Sasha never contacted me again. I heard years later that she'd moved to Florida, that she'd remarried, that she'd started over, which is what people do. I don't hold on to anger about her anymore. What she did was wrong. What she attempted to do was criminal. But she was also a person in pain, and sometimes people in pain do terrible things. I learned something through all of this. I learned that love and protection are not the same thing. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is tell them the truth, even if it breaks them temporarily. That your house and your savings and your security are important, but they're not as important as your integrity. That raising a good son means that he will sometimes disappoint you, but he will also sometimes surprise you with his ability to acknowledge his failures and grow from them. And I learned that sometimes the dinner you plan to defend yourself is the most important meal you'll ever have. Because it wasn't the meal that mattered. It wasn't the restaurant or the expensive wine or the perfectly cooked food. It was the moment when my son had to choose between the woman he thought he loved and the woman who actually loved him without condition or manipulation. He chose me, eventually. And that choice changed everything.